Government of UAE from the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. It goes without saying, adaptation is a priority for us in the region. It has been said in various reports, global reports, regional reports, and also national level reports. It has been communicated to the Conference of Parties, the upper body of the climate governance on the international stage. It is also recognized and also clarified in the series of assessment reports that are coming from the International Panel on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. So adaptation is by far is a priority for the countries here in the region. We have many vulnerabilities, very climate risk region, especially when it comes to water, agriculture, even infrastructure will be affected by climate change and so on. So this webinar is part of a series of webinars that we are conducting in collaboration with the RCO, the Resident Coordinator Office in UAE, and our partners in the UN, and the expanded partners, of course, from the region and outside the region. It's all to prepare for the COP27, but also to really set the foundations for COP28 that will be organized or hosted by the United Arab Emirates next year, inshallah. So with this, I would like to invite Ms. Mona Ahmed Al-Amoudi, the Director of Climate Change Department, to say a few opening remarks. Thank you very much. Did you hear me? Or I was talking to myself?
Yes, we heard you.
Okay. Is Ms. Mona with us?
She was with us a minute ago, but perhaps she's facing technical difficulties.
Okay. Okay. I suggest that we move forward and we will give the chance for Ms. Al-Amoudi to come in at a later stage, maybe in the commentary or in the question and answer sessions.
We have her with us now.
Okay. Ms. Mona, I was just introducing the webinar and also invited you to say a few words as opening remark on behalf of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and Environment. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Abdul Majid, and apologies as I cannot open my cam. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
So I would like to welcome you all, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. A very good afternoon to you all. And it is my pleasure to join you today in this afternoon in the second series of the sessions of 28 event. I would like to welcome you all in this workshop, and I hope it will be a fruitful discussion. UAE has made significant progress when it comes to the climate mitigation adaptation action and has established itself as a climate leader in the MENA region and globally. UAE recently has released its second updated NDCs with the new updated target, which was 31% compared to business as usual of 2030. What is really important on the second NDC is also the updates that include, or let's say the statement that include that we are also working and updating the NDC in the coming year, 2023, with the full reflection of the net zero strategy. Of course, being that this session dedicated purely on the adaptation, I need to emphasize that the work related to the adaptation program for the UAE has already started by 2017. And on that specifically, we have sectorial action plan been developed for health, environment, infrastructure, and energy. As we speak today, we are assessing the action plan received from the different stakeholders with the provision that we are going ahead with the development of NAP, which is the National Adaptation Program. The UAE was actually well recognized when it's come to the climate action and the commitment coming from the leadership, but it's always important to emphasize in the point that we need to proceed with both mitigation and adaptation action plan. With that, I will give the floor back to you, Mr. Abdul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Amoudi, for this very well-positioned remark for our webinar today. Now we can move into the keynote intervention. We'll have a keynote intervention from Mr. Tariq Al-Khouri, my colleague in UNEP, and also Qais Al-Yasri. And then we will have commentaries from the agencies that are really partner in this webinar, plus the WMO, our good friend Dr. Hisham. And then after that, we will have a session on questions and answers from the participants. I recognize that we have about how many participants? Maybe about above 40 participants. Oh no, 70 actually, 70 plus participants, which is very, very good number. It shows the importance of these kind of webinars, and the purpose is really to actually raise awareness on the adaptation issue. The main topic that will be spoken now by Mr. Tariq Al-Khouri is the global goal on adaptation. It's a big title, and we would like to hear from Tariq and Qais what it means. Thank you. Tariq, please, you have the floor.
Sorry, I was speaking while muting. Okay, thank you, Abdelmajid. Good evening, colleague, and our distinguished participant. My name is Tariq Khouri. I'm the regional coordinator of the climate change program with UNEP Regional Office for West Asia. Before I start, allow me to start by thanking the regional coordinator office in UAE for organizing this webinar. At the same time, just a kind reminder that this webinar is recorded. The climate adaptation, as mentioned by my colleague Abdelmajid, is a priority for our region, as our region is not a big polluter. It's rather than a region that is impacted by climate change. Before we start to talk about the adaptation, it's very important to understand the global and regional risk for the global warming and for the increased level of the global warming. In the recent IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for this version, we had a new way of presenting impact. We had 5 scenarios, and those scenarios questions, or let's say they give us some outcome on what will happen if we keep the, let's say, the degree of warming by 1.5, or if we go continue business as usual, etc. So you can see the 5 scenarios on the left and in the timeline, and you can see the impact. You can see why we should be concerned about this impact. So if you can see the line of the 1.5, we are already at a very high risk when it comes to threatening the ecosystems. We are not doing well as well when it comes to weather event, when distribution of impact, etc. But if we go toward more and more let's say global warming, or reaching, for instance, the 4-degree, we will be at very high risk for all element of risk, including the large-scale singular events. At the same time, the recent IPCC report also showed us the impact of climate change on many ecosystem and human system worldwide. If we look at the, Africa and Asia, where our regions is mostly located, we can see that we are in a very high risk when it comes to change in ecosystem structure or when it comes to species range shift. There is no region whatsoever is not impacted or it's not in high risk. So all that, I'm starting with this explanation to move to the impact chain for us to start to understand why we should adapt or what is adaptation and how it is and why it is important. So if we take, for instance, the climate variable, whether it's from rainfall instantly or temperature extreme or number of hot days, and we realize that those variables are causing climate hazard. If we take one example, let's say if we take the number of hot days. So this variable is giving us a climate hazard, whether related to climate condition for pest disease or for water stress and drought. And this climate hazard will have an impact on agricultural system. It might have an impact, or it will have an impact on agricultural disease, or disease coming from pests, or on water availability for the region. So from climate variable to climate hazards to this to its impact on the agricultural system, we will have an impact on the communities and on the system and on the human life. And this will reach to, let's say, reduction in food security and nutrition, or it will have an impact on our health condition like the recent pandemic, etc. So this is what we call it the impact chain of climate. And this is why we should work on adaptation. The recent let's say, big incidents that we all heard about, and we are sure that it will be the topic to be discussed in COP27, the floods in Pakistan, which have killed over 1,500 people. This flood were caused by higher than usual in the monsoon rains and in melting glaciers that followed a severe heat wave, all of which are linked to climate change, of course. And it is the world's deadliest flood since 2017, comparing to South Asia floods. And it describes as the worst in the country's history. So we can start to see the impact of climate change. On 25 August, Pakistan declared the state of emergency because of this flooding. And by 29 August, Pakistan Minister of Climate Change said around 1/3 of the country was underwater, affecting 33 million people. The government of Pakistan has estimated the loss of $10 billion so far from the floods across the country. So why we need adaptation? Besides what I have mentioned before, if we conclude a key element from UNEP emission gas report for 2021, we need, as of now, 30% reduction to limit the warming to 2 degrees. We need 55% reduction to keep or to save the 1.5 degree Celsius. But if we look at what countries has committed in their NDCs and the announced budget for pledges, for 2030, we will be reducing only 75% of the emission. Therefore, the existing commitment, if implemented, will result only in warming of 2.7 degree in the century. Moreover, the G20 members as a group do not have policies in place to achieve even the NDCs or what is written in the NDCs. Before we dive into adaptation as well, it's very important to understand the difference between adaptation and mitigation. According to the IPCC definition, mitigation, it's mostly about emission reduction. It's a human intervention to reduce emission or to enhance the sink of greenhouse gases. In simple words, stopping climate change from getting worse. This one, it comes to mitigation. So mitigation is about energy efficiency. It's about greater use of renewable energy like solar panel, etc. It's about efficiency in transportation, mostly about carbon tax and emission market and reducing emission in general. When it comes to adaptation, it's the way we fight the climate change. It's about having more secure location infrastructure when it comes to sea high level raise. It is also about working on the nature to do landscape restoration. It's about having a flexible and diverse cultivation to be prepared for natural catastrophe. It's also about prevention and precaution measure for climate change in general. Now, when it comes also to understand the conception of the risk, the climate hazards, the people exposure to the hazards, and their vulnerability status all contribute to risk, to climate risk. Adaptation includes investment in adaptive capacity from inclusive point of view, which include financial, social organization, institutional reform, etc., as well as adapting of a livelihood, infrastructure, urban development, and all other area when it comes to adapting to climate change. As a result, adaptation strategy must include action to improve the baseline development uh, process from the socioeconomic perspective as well as from the climate risk perspective. One, let's say the approach or the thinking when we battle the climate change impact, it's the climate resilience development. It's only possible when government works with all other stakeholders like civil society, private sector, and all other stakeholders. The climate resilience development is facilitated by international cooperation, by government at all levels, and by getting input and collaborating with academia, etc. So if we start with the climate resilience, if we want to work on climate resilience, we normally start with reducing climate risk, which is the core definition of adaptation. It's also about reducing the emission, therefore working on enhancing the biodiversity and therefore achieving the sustainable development. There is many solution framework, but I'll try now to run a bit more faster because I'm lagging. I'm a bit late in developing what I said. Now, back to adaptation, which is the core topic of our webinar. We start by, let's learn about what adaptation mean in Article 7 in Paris Agreement. Adaptation effort shall, it's not should, it shall be recognized and aims at achieving a balance between financial resource allocated to mitigation and to adaptation. The global goal on adaptation, which has a big, let's say, milestone in the last COP and in the upcoming, it will have as well important work to be done in COP 27. It's about enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change. This goal is qualitative. So the parties actually established a global goal on adaptation to enhance adaptive capacity, to strengthen resilience, and to reduce vulnerability to climate change. This goal, it's qualitative and does not include a quantitative goal for adaptation finance yet. However, the parties or all member states recognize the link between mitigation and adaptation need, and that such needs involve costs. Diving in on the global goal and adaptation, in the last COP, there was a launch of the 2-year Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program, which represented a significant, a major step forward in establishing the global goal on adaptation outline, which is the Article 7 in Paris Agreement. There was a discussion in Glasgow also, and the subsequent decision to reinforce that adaptation action is inherently national and local. And here comes the challenge between the developed and developing countries. For the developing countries, it's crucial that the global goal on adaptation reflect the reality on the ground, and it will be nationally determined and locally appropriate as country see fits. At the same time, this, let's say, major achievement in the last COP recognize that global goal on adaptation should not become a top-down reporting exercise, rather than it should become a tool that help countries to identify their strength and their weaknesses so they can be better in a position to respond to impact of climate change. There is still a lot of work that need to be done to bring the global goal on adaptation concept to life or to materialize it, and to have a quantitative element when it comes to finance and implementation and measurement. There is also a striking balance between the global goal on adaptation and its purposes, while the purpose of it, while providing sufficient flexibility for countries to describe their own adaptation objective and progress, etc. So adaptation now has become a key feature of the international climate talks, the Bonn Climate Change Conference, which discuss always the importance of this topic and the means for implementation. Yeah, so also more information on what on Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program. So this work program will be carried out jointly by the scientific community and by the subsidy body of implementation. It's also a reasonable to think that this will be that the global goal of adaptation will be a high priority for COP27 presidency, given that the global goal adaptation was first proposed by the African group since 2030, and this COP is happening in Africa. We know that there was a plan to have a 4 workshop last year, and if I'm not wrong, only 1 workshop took place. So the conclusion of the work program will be a draft decision for consideration and adaptation in COP 28. This is very important to note, especially for a colleague in UAE. If we go back now talking about adaptation plan or national adaptation plan, the global rate of adaptation plan has increased significantly. We noticed that countries are developing and improving their initial plans. We know that the growth of adaptation planning throughout the world has merged with more serious warning from the IPCC. We also know that new and adopted and new nationally determined contribution and new NDCs in the countries suggest that countries are already joining in this direction by including more quantitative and time-bound objective in the adaptation part of the NDC and in the adaptation contribution. So in front of you is kind of a timeline of, let's say, the key milestone on adaptation planning. A lot of countries have reached the 3rd national plan strategies and updated their NAP, National Adaptation Plan. From the region, we know that UAE, as mentioned by Ms. Muna, is working on the adaptation work plan, and they have, and I was very happy to learn that UAE is planning to work on the national adaptation plan. We at UNEP, we are supporting Iraq in developing its national adaptation plan, and we are starting to do so with Syria as well. We know that Kuwait did it and finalized it as well. Yeah, so also this information is extracted by UNEP Global Adaptation Gap Report. We know that countries have constantly made progress in creating adaptation plan, not very much in our region. In 2021, almost 80% of the countries have implemented at least one national adaptation plan instrument. Developing countries has made gradual progress in formulating and implementing national adaptation plans since the process was established in 2010. Yet, at least 125 out of 145 developing countries had undertaken activities and projects related to NAP. So also to understand adaptation better, in front of you, it's a composition of a primary sector addressed by adaptation project at the global level. We notice agriculture, it's still an exception, having increased significantly to an average of nearly 25% over the last 5 years when it comes to type of project per sector, per adaptation. Water, still as the primary sector, accounted for less than 10% of the new adaptation project in 2013, 2015, and 2016, but has steadily increased since then, reaching 21% in 2019. The ecosystem as a primary sector also accounted for around 25% of the new adaptation project from 2010 to 2009, but saw a significant decrease in 2018, 2019 to 7% respectively. Still have 2 minutes because I don't have to take a lot of time. Adaptation finance remain a priority for our Arab negotiator and for our region. Our Secretary General called and argued that 50% of the climate finance should be designated for adaptation. Yet, 2 years ago, only 7% of the world total climate finance, which is 630 billion, was committed to adaptation, while the remaining 93% mostly devoted to mitigation. This is very important note for our region and for our negotiator. Although there is an increase in climate finance of 26% between 2019 and 2020, we all know that the 100 billion target for 2020 was, well, I mean, it have not met, and we know that only 10% of this number have been committed so far or paid. So this is just a quick view on the climate finance per sector. It's matching the two slides ago when I presented the sectors from project focus based on adaptation. I'll not go into the details. When it comes to climate finance distribution, for adaptation, we know that funded adaptation projects are unevenly distributing between countries. We are not doing so well in the region. Majority of the project is being located in East, Southern, and West Africa, as well as a big part of Asia. Fewer projects are found in Central Asia and the Middle East and part of North Africa. So what are the gaps in terms of adaptation finance? There are some indication that a sizable adaptation finance gap remain existing. Monitoring and evaluation system continue to be underrepresented and are only in place in about 1/4 of the countries. This is also very important for our region. When it comes to monitoring and evaluation, as I said, while over 1/3 of the countries have an adaptation detected monitoring and evaluation system under development, only 1/4 already have one in place. Also, other limits or gap to adaptation. It's important to know that hard limits to adaptation have been reached in some ecosystem to a very high level. With increased global warming, loss and damage, which is an important topic as well for the region, will increase, and additional human and natural system will reach adaptation limits. Let me give you example, although I started to pass my time. Individual and household in low-lying coastal areas, especially for instance in Africa and Asia, have reached a soft limit for the high-level rise. Also, ecosystem already reaching or surpassing hard adaptation limit includes some warm water coral reefs, some coastal wetlands, some rainforests, etc. Above the 1.5 degree global warming level, some ecosystem, let's say, solution will fail and will not be subject for adaptation. So that's why adaptation measures will lose their effectiveness in providing benefit to people as these ecosystems will reach hard adaptation limits. Above 1.5 degree global warming level, limited freshwater resource pose potential hard limit for small island as well and for a region depending on glacier and snow melt. Sorry for passing my time. Allow me to stop here. Back to
Try to
you.
wrap up. Oh, okay, you
Yes,
finished.
thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq. And my apology, I did not do the proper introduction, Tariq. Uh, I may just say that Tariq is now coordinating the climate change sub-program at UNEP Regional Office for West Asia. He has multi-dimensional experience in environment, urban planning, land, and sustainable development. He gained solid knowledge on interrelated relationship between resource flow, resource efficiency, circular economy, and climate change. So this is Tariq, and for Ms. Min Al-Amoudi, she heads the Climate Change Department at the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. She has extensive policy experience in the areas of sustainability, climate change, carbon management, future energy, environment and waste management. An engineer by training, she had worked on key strategic future energy supply security policies and is also certified ISO lead auditor on environmental health and safety management systems. And we are pleased that Ms. Al-Amoudi is always supportive of our work in UAE, our collective work by the UN system, sister agencies in UAE. And of course, we'll be available to extend the support needed for the UAE to have a very successful COP28, inshallah. So with that, I will move into the second speaker. You have 10 minutes. The second speaker is Qais Al-Yasiri. Qais has over 12 years of experience in the development and humanitarian fields in the UN system, including 5 years in the environmental field. In 2021, he joined UNEP West Asia office as a national officer based in Iraq, handling the climate action portfolio in the country to support the implementation of the National Adaptation Plan project funded by the Green Climate Fund for Iraq, and also the second National Communication and Biennial Update Report. Qais will be speaking about supporting intervention. He will support intervention on the adaptation in West Asia region. So we are zooming from the global to the regional. So Qais, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes sharp, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Abdul Majid. Thank you, Tariq, and very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Abdul Majid indicated, we are trying now from moving from the global perspective of adaptation into the effect of climate change on the Arab region. So in this short session, we will be focusing on the impact of climate change on the Arab region, and what are the initiatives that are being taken by UNEP to support and provide technical support to the government in the Arab region in countering climate change. So with that, I will start the session with a context. So the effect of a climate change is being felt by the Arab countries, and it's not particularly to any nation. It's the Arab countries are feeling started now to feel and the effect of climate change. And this is very obvious from the extreme weather events, starting from drought, shortage in falling in raining, and in increasing temperatures, etc., etc. Just name it. However, the most affected people are the poor people, and region was so the climate change in the region and the impact is not equal. Always the poor are paying the price, while some nations are now emitting high carbon emissions in the air. The poor are paying the price. And the problem with the poor people, they have limited resources, and they cannot cope, and they cannot actually address these climate change, how they cope. So, and in the current times, what we see a lot of movements inside the one country, because of people they have no other option just to move inside the country. That's why the most affected people of the climate change are the people who are the paying. Also, the adaptation capacity of the countries differ. We have countries with good resources, and they are capable of addressing climate challenges. Whereas some other nations in the Arab region, our countries are falling short behind because of lack resources. So here is very important to have a kind of convergence and complementarity between the nations in the Arab region to help each other and to build synergies and to address the climate change. That's why here transboundary climate information is very important. And UNEP is also taking the kind of, for example, the study on transboundary water issue. This is very This is very key in sharing information between countries when it comes to climate change. Also, the Arab region, the countries are varied greatly in culture and in education, in responding to climate change. We have some nations that are responding very well to the climate change, and they have taken very serious initiatives in addressing climate change. Some nations is still lacking behind, and this is, as I indicated, is because of lack of resources and financial resources, actually, the technologies as well. Um, so, so what are the impact? Abdelmajid indicated in his opening remarks there are several sectors that have been affected by climate change, and we can summarize them here in this presentation. For example, fresh water, water scarcity. The Arab region is one of the most water scarce regions, increasing the region's reliance on the groundwater. So water scarcity is something we always started to witness that. For example, in Iraq, the Euphrates and Tigris are started to deplete because of climate change. Also, there are more than 80% of the freshwater withdrawals in Djibouti, Libya, and the state of Palestine, as well as Saudi Arabia. So also food security. Food security, climate change has affected a lot of land, and now which has become arid or semi-arid, and people started to move out of their areas, affecting agriculture productivity. So as well as water scarcity is all interlinked between climate change, water scarcity, and food security. Also tourism, climate change poses a threat to World Heritage. There are a lot of places that have been sought before, or they where people try to visit. Now they are no longer as a good places because of the climate change. For example, the citrus Labani, or the Lebanese citrus, is now almost started by 2100. As we expect that to reduce. And also the marshlands in Iraq, the marshlands have started the water in the marshlands, which were a spot that many tourists try to visit and see. Now it's drained, and it's almost because of a drought, and the marshlands now, the water has withdrawn there in the marshlands. Also, climate change is threatening species of the Jordan's Wadi Rum. protected area. So we can see that all the tourism is also, which climate change is affecting tourism, which considers one of the most important revenues for governments. And if we are speaking in terms of economic development, infrastructure is another sector that is being affected by climate change. Energy infrastructure, for example, because of extreme weather events, have been affected in Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Palestine. Also in Lebanon, we don't see because of the climate change, there is disruption in infrastructure, in energy infrastructure. Other sectors that have been affected or being affected is human health. Now, governments in the Arab region started to recognize that a lot of diseases now is because of a climate change. There are direct and indirect. The direct kind has to do with the storms, for example, sandstorms and heat waves, or indirect that has to do with disease, with waterborne pathogens or disease vectors. So health has been recognized as climate change is affecting human health, and this sector also came as for example, a priority sector in Iraq, as one of the sector that needs to develop its adaptation plan to challenge climate change. Coastal areas as well is another sector. For example, in the Arabian Peninsula, Egypt, Sudan are expected to experience increased island flooding as sea level rises. For example, another example is Basra. Basra is expected to be flooded by Shatt al-Arab when because of sea level rise. So sea level rise is another issue by climate change, biodiversity. For example, the coast of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates, around 55 species are vulnerable to climate change and endangered. And also, I'm giving also another example. Since I'm based here in Iraq, we have a lot of species in the marshlands now have disappeared, completely disappeared from the marshlands because of droughts, because of the withdrawal in water in that area. Also, due increase in coral bleaching events as well due to water scarcity and the drought, the incidence of tree death has increased in Morocco. This is another example how climate change has affected biodiversity. Dust storms. Just in June in Iraq, we had 4 to 5 incidents of dust storms, and from 1980 to present, the frequency of dust storms have increased and grown, and it's really now a problem. Here also it comes when it comes to collaboration between the Arab regions, when it comes to dust storm, because it is not combined to one country. We see in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in Syria, the dust storms have grown recently. That needs to be encountered. So these are the sectors that have been affected by climate change, and there should be a kind of adaptation that needs to be plans that need to be faced. Finally, so what is UNEP is doing to support governments to counter climate change? So, for example, the Lima Adaptation Knowledge Initiative that is under the Nairobi program of work between the UNFCCC and the UN Environment, where we identify gaps in existing knowledge information. Adaptation plans in Iraq, one is taking place under the GCF, and also there is another proposal for Syria. So that's why UNEP is supporting the government in national adaptation plans. I hope I did not exceed the 10 minutes, Abdul Majid, and I stick within within my timeline. Thank you, Abdul Majid.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Only 2 minutes extra. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Grace. Thank you very much, Tariq. Now, we heard from Tariq on the global level and also from Qais what it means at the regional level, focusing on West Asia and Arab states. We understood now that, yes, adaptation is a priority for the region. But without mitigation, we will have, a very moving adaptation target. Because what I learned from my, experience on climate change is that the first adaptation action is mitigation, actually. So if you want to adapt to improve resilience, you first have to remove the cause, which is actually one of the environment principles that we learn and also we preach. So we have to mitigate the risk first and then adapt to impacts. Second, as Tariq highlighted, adaptation goal is not quantitative, it's qualitative. Measurement of adaptation is not as easy as measurement of mitigation. Mitigation, you have numbers, you have X number of tons of carbon dioxide reduced, you can measure them, you can have your inventory, and then you come back after 1 year and see how much reduction or how much increase you have. But adaptation, how you can measure. That's why measuring adaptation is actually difficult. But they are trying to find ways in the international process to make first adaptation monitored, okay, reported on, and evaluated. So they use the term MRE, monitoring, reporting, evaluation, to actually capture the cycle of adaptation status in each country. Second, through the adaptation planning at the country level, they try also to actually have some sort of monitoring and evaluation framework for these adaptation plans, since adaptation is local, so the baseline for adaptation is actually set at the at the local and then national level, because also adaptation is judgmental, and also analytical rather than, as I said, numerical. With that, I would like to invite our distinguished experts for commentary. We have 15 minutes for the commentary, so 5 minutes each. And first, I would like to invite our partner uh, from the UNDRR, UN Disaster Risk Reduction Agency, Miss Loretta Gerard. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. She brings 25 years of frontline experience in emergency setting, having headed UNDRR operations in Asia Pacific, covering 38 countries there. She also has first-hand experience in humanitarian needs assessment and disaster management, including global humanitarian cluster coordination mechanisms. I'll give you the floor, Ms. Lorita, please. 5 minutes intervention.
Thank you very much. And what
Thank
a
you.
rich discussion it's been so far. I feel like the presentations really explained extremely well the urgent need for adaptation. And in fact, if I may, I'd like to maybe start off by saying that it is my hope that this COP27 is where urgency is really going to be injected into the deliberations, because the reality is that we are running out of time. At the midpoint of the Sendai framework implementation, we are seeing some alarming trends. For example, the rate of people affected by disasters has risen dramatically over the past decade, from 1 in every 100,000 people to 6 in every 100,000 people. And we know that climate change is really increasing the frequency and the intensity of hazards. Obviously, it was discussed already today about Pakistan. The torrential rains that hit in some of the provinces was 8 times more than rain as usual. But let's not forget that this also collides with decades-old lack of investment in risk reduction. Millions of people in Pakistan live in flood-prone areas with outdated drainage, and upgrading the drainage, moving the homes, reinforcing bridges and roads would all help prevent such catastrophic damage in the future. But like elsewhere around the world, risk reduction has not been prioritized. And already 3.6 billion people are estimated to live in situations which are highly vulnerable to climate change. If I take just the example of Afghanistan, where I've lived and worked for several years, this country has already seen a temperature increase of 1.8 degrees. So it's making it extremely highly prone to floods, drought, but also extreme environmental degradation. And the population relies on mobility, unmanaged mobility and displacement as entrenched coping mechanisms. But that brings its own risks. And of course, those who can't move remain exposed to continuous environmental stress with the ensuing consequences on their lives and livelihoods, which includes extremely high levels of food insecurity, which we are seeing as a major threat around the world. So some of the things that I would like to point out to today is the need to scale up comprehensive risk management. For us, it's extremely important to think about climate change adaptation at the same time that we think about disaster risk reduction, but also humanitarian action and development action. We've been talking about the national adaptation plans today, but the reality is that many countries have disaster risk reduction strategies, and we feel that there is a large body of work to be undertaken to ensure that these national risk management strategies really more firmly embed climate, and at the same time that the NAPs, the national adaptation plans, include risk reduction measures. And that takes me to the question of the global goal on adaptation and how we measure it. The Sendai framework targets allow us to measure mortality linked to disasters, the number of people affected, economic losses, and more than 120 countries already have disaster accounting systems in place that can be disaggregated by disaster type. So we really would hope to see that the work that's going on with the Global Goal on Adaptation benefits from the decades-long work in disaster risk reduction, that we don't reinvent the wheel, that we draw on the processes and tools that are already at our disposal. At the same time, the global stocktake of the Paris Agreement is being aligned for the midterm review of the Sendai framework. Again, looking at disasters more generally, but let's bear in mind that 80 to 90% of the disasters that are carried out in countries come from extreme weather events, which are linked to climate change. So we really do have an opportunity to benefit from the work that's been done to date. And the other point I would really like to emphasize is that when we are thinking about adaptation, let us not forget the need for local and community level action, especially urban action. It's our hope that COP27 will pave the way for making COP28 a COP that is very much focused on local level interventions and ensuring that more financing is devolved and decentralized to the local level. And my final 10 seconds, I would really like to say that we need to focus more attention on the vulnerable and highly fragile contexts that are not receiving climate financing right now, but are very much on the front line and where the populations are most at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Loretta. This is an excellent intervention and eye-opener on the Sunday framework and how it can contribute to measuring the global goal on adaptation. The second intervention commentary is from Mr. Marcos Tebo, officer in charge of the sub-regional office for the GCC and Yemen, from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Mr. Tebo is the officer in charge, as I said, and he is a senior livestock development officer. He is widely published scientific scholar and development practitioner with expertise in animal breeding and genetics, animal health, food security and nutritional policy, and in climate change adaptation and mitigation, especially for the livestock sector. You have 5 minutes to give us your valuable intervention, please. Marcos, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I will be brief. And my focus will be on the adaptation, which relates to agriculture and agro ecosystems. By the way, we have spent quite a substantial time discussing on the impacts of climate change on natural resources or any other areas. But you know, the action plan that we have talked about, maybe in 2012, ministers of the Arab region came together to discuss on to adapt and mitigate climate change impacts on natural resources, especially focusing on fisheries and aquaculture, forestry and livestock. Since then, the actions were taken by few countries. So far, the recommendations are still there, live, and the actions were limited. And therefore, discussing on the impacts will not save us. What can save us is taking action. Therefore, I really want to focus on the actions than on the impacts, because the impacts are clear and the impacts are becoming more significant as the extreme events are becoming more frequent and severe. And if we see the limited the access to water and the land, this region has a main challenge for agricultural production. And because of the limited natural resources, the region is import dependent for its food security. And therefore, whatever action we do will be limited by the resources available. Therefore, the actions that are being taken using all these technologies, the new technologies are focusing on improving productivity per unit of inputs, like productivity per unit of water, productivity per unit of land, productivity per unit of feed or any input that we give to our productive assets. Therefore, a number of recommendations were put forward on adaptation options for water resources, adaptation for crop production systems, adaptation option for environment, adaptation option for rangeland and forests, adaptation options for livestock, and a number of them are already on table. But the strategies and I think we have been talking about this like for a couple of years, but the actions on ground are not really that much visible. Like by improving productivity, we can reduce emission per unit of per product or per unit of land or water that we use. Therefore, I think we should be focusing on, for example, new crops, more tolerant and efficient water use crops, planting a variety of heat and drought resistant crops, just focusing on the technologies. Like, for example, for livestock, integrating the crop and livestock allows better use of crop residues. Like, for example, as simple as reducing food loss and waste, and reducing feed loss and waste, for example, can give us more feed resources for our animals. And also by improving their genetics, we can improve the livestock productivity. And also the use of bioenergy, the use of organic fertilizer or a source of bioenergy for biogas, by reducing that reduces pressure on the available resources, like diversifying the type of herd we keep. Like some animals are more adapted than others to dry and hot climate, and keeping multi-species, multi-breed, and herd splitting into smaller manageable groups, and sometimes also like moving them into different areas could really help buffer against climatic and economic adversities. And like this, by doing so, we can also reduce overgrazing And
Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you can wrap up, please.
okay,
Of
okay,
course, please.
okay,
We
okay,
are over the time. Unless you want to,
okay,
I think
okay. Thank you.
we
You
are over
yourself
the
is
time overall.
okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm wrapping up. Thank you so much. Therefore, by doing these things, we can take action to reduce the impacts on environment, on agricultural systems, and therefore countries need to take action. And let's talk less and do more. I think we have been having a lot of meetings, a lot of actions, a lot of talks than actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcos Tebo, for this valuable intervention. Again, another dimension of adaptation from the livestock agriculture and agri-technology means to actually improve resilience and adaptation capacities in the region. So now I have the pleasure to invite Dr. Hisham Abdelghani. He's the regional representative for Arab region from the World Meteorology Organization. You have the floor. You have 5 minutes, Dr. Abdelghani. Nice to see you again. So please, the floor is yours.
First, many thanks for the organizer for the kind invitation and providing me the opportunity to give few insight and highlight the contribution of WMO to the climate adaptation agenda, and special greeting to Dr. Dr. Abdel Majid. As you are aware, the global climate adaptation agenda is very wide and involves various socio-economic sectors: agriculture, energy, water, environment, health, and many others. This is with the key goal for enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening the resilience, and reducing vulnerability to the climate change, as Tariq indicated earlier. It has been noted that some of the adaptation-related projects are not based on the scientific information and the knowledge. And here the role and the mandate of the WMO to provide the scientific-based information to the decision maker to properly inform the preparation of the adaptation strategies, policies, program, and the project. Allow me to focus here on one critical initiative which is led by WMO with partnership with other relevant UN agencies and the donor community. This is the UN Global Early Warning Initiative for Climate Adaptation. This initiative was launched by UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, who asked WMO to lead the effort to ensure within 5 years all the people are protected by early warning system. I would like to stress here on the critical role of the public-private engagement for the success of this initiative. And of course, you are aware the early warning is not just apps on the mobile, but it ranges from the observation, monitoring, data processing, impact-based forecasting. And I stress here on the word impact, because early there was only the forecasting, but now we're looking what the impact of this forecasting on various sectors, issuing the warning, communication of the warning to the relevant authority and the public. Evidence from monitoring and scientific research indicated that rising risk of the hazards such as flood, droughts, and the storm linked to the climate change, and this is really clear. Extreme weather, climate, water, and the related environmental impact resulted in hundreds of billions of dollars of economic losses and the heavy toll on the human life and well-being. Early warning systems are an effective and indispensable means to save life, reduce losses related to water, climate, and weather, and other environmental hazards. And hence, it is really key element for the climate change adaptation. However, there are still major gaps in the early warning system. This is affecting around 1/3 of the world's most vulnerable people who are not protected by early warning system. 53% of the meteorological and hydrological national services reported that their ability to provide the effective early warning system is limited due to lack of capacity in observing, monitoring infrastructure, in data processing and forecasting system, in the communication and information management system, and institutional support to sustain the effective operation. UN global warning for all will contribute significantly to the climate change adaptation strategies from the global up to the local scales. Again, I stress on the global societal risk related to the extreme weather, climate, water, and other environmental events should be addressed through interdisciplinary and multi-sectorial partnership. The relevant ongoing activity undertaken by the stakeholder in the private sector, in the international organization, and the other body, including development of the innovative technology in the hazard monitoring and forecasting, risk assessment and mapping, the risk information surface for decision maker. The initiative to benefit from the progress in the cloud computing, in the artificial intelligence, digital platform, and other area of the digital technology to address the infrastructure and technological gap in early warning service. The initiative will benefit also from the free and unrestricted data exchange as reflected in WMO Unified Data Policy for creation and delivery of early warning. Critical issue is that early warning must focus on impacts which require data, record, and domain and the area of expertise. There is a need for seasonal forecast as well as long-term climate risk assessment for multiple sectors such as disaster risk management, food security, water security, energy, health, and others, as some of the earlier speakers have indicated. Many of the current WMO products will be an asset to build on, such as the World Watch and the Global Regional State and the Climate Reports, World Weather Climate Extremes, and also the Climate Risk Early Warning System Program, and many others. WMO will use the opportunity of the COP27 to present the action plan for implementing the UN Global Early Warning Initiative for the climate adaptation. I end my comment by inviting the key stakeholders from all sectors to advocate and to contribute to the distribution of the global infrastructure that deliver multi-hazard early warning to all, particularly to protect the most vulnerable people and the members of society. This is because the provision of the global multi-hazard early warning is our collective responsibility. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Back to you, Dr. Abmegid.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdul Ghani, for this important intervention, where you presented to us the global tools and platforms available to actually have early warning system, but also to base our adaptation actions on science and data. The same thing that we are really promoting in UNEP. Because without knowing what to adapt for, and what kind of adaptation actions, appropriate adaptation actions, it will be difficult to achieve your adaptation goal. So with this, we conclude the commentary, and now we open the floor for questions and answer. Unfortunately, we actually passed the time, but we started a bit late. So I will take the liberty of being a facilitator and add 10 minutes from now to the end of the webinar. So we'll have 10 minutes of questions and answers from the floor. We can either you can post your action on the chat box, or you can speak. But if you speak, please be succinct, short, to the point, and give us a hint to whom the question is addressed. I think within the 10 minutes, we can take only 3 to 4 questions maximum. The floor is open, please. Okay. Can you help me, Tariq? Okay, Mr. Tariq, can you help me with the names, please?
Sure, but the hand disappeared immediately.
Yes, there was Islam, and then yes, left. Okay, I think we also had a dropout since we beyond the time. Okay, he's back. So, Mr. Islah Ad-Din. Mr. Islah Ad-Din. Mr. or Mrs. I don't know. It's not
Hello,
so clear to
everyone.
me.
This is Isla, and I'm
Yeah,
from
Islah, please.
Pakistan, and I've been an environmentalist and a sustainable professional for some time, mostly working for the power sector. My question to Mr. Tariq and other professionals is what we are facing, just like you mentioned in Pakistan situation in the recent flood. It's been very devastating what we have seen, and we have never seen this before, early. So all we were professionals be talking about is the climate justice, and even in the UN it's been discussed that well, how we can actually help these people or the other countries who are not being the biggest contributor, but have been the biggest affectees of the actual climate change. And I think we have to, that's where I would like to know how you understand, you can, we can really resolve this issue. And we have talked about the financial constraints and technological constraints, but eventually these countries don't have access to it. And so how can they be helped directly or indirectly? Indirectly by by other countries. If they help by reducing the pollution, definitely we get lesser effects. So what we feel is how financially, what financial measures the community, international, the UN can support, and other than what we've been listing so far about the green bonds, the UN financial initiatives, been working a lot on it. So how do you see how it can be so practical that the 2030 or 2050 targets of 1.5 degrees may be achieved? Thank you.
I think we can take another question and then I can ask the speakers to respond. We don't have another question, so Tariq, please, if you can respond
Okay.
to Mr.
Thank you.
Salahuddin.
Thank you, Abdul Majid.
Salah.
Thank you, Mr. Salahuddin. This is important questions. Yeah, I mean, we can answer this question from two perspectives. First is the topic of the webinar, which is adaptation. Of course, with just such extreme weather, we cannot do much, but if we are in a way well prepared or we did some adaptation project, it might help us to has a less impact than what we had, for instance, in Pakistan. This is just an example. But what we can do is to accelerate the climate finance agenda, to push for it. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but this is done normally at the negotiator level and at the head of state level at the same time for the opening and for being part of the COPs and etc. So, and as you mentioned very much correctly, working on mitigation, it's a must. And as mentioned by the moderator, working on mitigation will result of less emission, therefore less global warming, therefore less extreme weather event. But yet, yes, I think the key for now to response to Pakistan natural disaster is, of course, to tap on the available climate finance resource, whether from GEF, from GCF, and I'm sure the Pakistani negotiator will bring up this topic strongly at COP 27. I'm also aware that several UN agencies are part of the discussion for the response and for accelerating having access to emergency fund, including climate fund, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tariq. I think I have another question from Mr. Amir.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question about the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. We heard the benefits of this framework, but I would like to hear more about the limitations of the framework. And I'd like my question to be understood only as an intellectual. The purpose of the question is intellectual. It's not to say that it's not useful or anything. Just to understand more about the benefits and limitations of different frameworks. Thank you.
Okay, if we don't have another question at the same time, I can go to Ms. Loretta, please, if you kindly answer. Lorita? You are muted, Lorita. Is she with us, Lorita?
Yes, connected. But
Yeah, but maybe.
I will
Okay,
check.
any other questions? May I ask the organizer to connect both Amir and Lorita if they want to have a bilateral discussion after the webinar? Okay, she might have some problems with the connections or with the camera or the mic. So if I may ask either Mr. Raidan Al-Saqaf or Tariq to connect both Amir and if you can put your email address in the chat box, Amir, we can connect you to Loretta and you can have a chat with her on the topic. Okay. Okay, with this, I would like to thank the speakers. I would like to thank you all, the audience, the participants from different parts of the world. I think we have very good presence in this webinar. It has been very useful learning experience for me. And also would like to thank the organizer, the RCO office and in Emirates. Okay, Amir is back. Amir, do you want to come in?
Yes, the chat box is disabled, so I was not able to use it to post.
Okay, we'll try to find out. Okay, Tariq will get in touch with you. I'm sure he will find a way to get your email address. So thanks to the resident coordinator office in UAE and in particular Mr. Raidan Saqaf, who has been leading this organization. To my colleague Tariq from our office, Qais, and also from our partners, FAO and UNDRR for this successful webinar. And I would like to give the floor now to my colleague, Raidan Saqaf, to actually close the webinar, to have a few remarks to close the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abdul Majid, and thank you all for participating in this productive discussion. When we started the series of webinars 28 for 28, we had our sights on having an intellectual and a meaningful conversation around the number of key topics on COP28, on the climate agenda, on what do we need to take forward. And when we start looking at COP28 as the global stocktake opportunity for the progress on the Paris Agreement, and we look at the different articles and the different provisions, we see that we have actually come a long way in terms of facilitating multilateral engagements around the topic of climate change and having agreed on a key framework and what it is that we need to work on. We know that Article 7 and 7.1 specifically talks about the global goal and adaptation, which asks that we have to adapt for a warming planet. We have to strengthen our resilience. We have to reduce the vulnerability of the ones who are more susceptible to the impacts of climate change in Pakistan and other parts of the world. So the question is that how do we exactly do that? There is a question of financing, and we know that we're falling far short than what we need to do. But there is also the question about technical capacity. What exactly is the national need in different contexts for different communities in order to adapt? Is it a question of investing in infrastructure, both hard man-made infrastructure as well as natural infrastructure? Is it a question of building the system so that our livelihoods are not disrupted by rising sea levels, by increasing intensity of natural disasters and frequency? What are these key issues? And these are key issues that are taken forward in the COP process. Just last week, there was actually an event, an engagement as a part of the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on adaptation, and was discussing the issue of methodologies indicators, so that we need to know how to measure where we are in terms of adaptation. And we need to set a benchmark of what it is. Does it mean that we're better adapted or maladapted, as Dr. Hisham mentioned, or are we adapting as humans, but we're leaving our biodiversity outside, as our colleague from FAO, Marcus, mentioned? And what does this mean for different contexts, for different locations? We still don't have the answer there. And we hope that the road to COP27, to COP28 and beyond that will help us focus more in terms of what it is to mean that we need in order to adapt, what kind of specific language and measures do we have to have in our national adaptation plans, but also our shared responsibility as a global community. After all, we are facing climate change because a handful of countries have industrialized and caused a big part of these emissions, and now we all have to pay the price. So there has to be a position of global solidarity in order to strengthen our collective response to a changing planet, hopefully to mitigate it as much as possible, but also to leave no one behind in our work. And with that note, I'd like to thank you all for contributing and for your discussions, for your continuous engagements. We look forward to continuing this work, and we look forward to a more successful work on adaptation towards COP27 and COP28. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.